Hello, profilers! It's time for our weekly rendezvous.
The podcast that shares with you true cases of French crime. And now, part 2 of episode Lost Girl.
Enjoy the story.
The following day, Tony Meillon, whose identity had been confirmed by fingerprinting, was taken into police custody for questioning at around 11:30 a.m. The first challenge for the gendarme was that the suspect was completely silent and refused to speak. He explained that he didn't know what the police were talking about. With a blank stare and a cold face, not a word came out of his mouth. The gendarme then tried several techniques to make Tony Meillon bend, but again, it didn't work. As the interrogation progressed, he repeatedly smirked, taunting the police, despite their threat of a life sentence.
But the investigators couldn't make any progress. For the moment, their priority is to find Laetitia Perrais quickly. Given that Tony Meillon is of no use in the search for the young woman, the 40 police officers in the field are taking over, along with 25 staff who are taking statements to try and gather as much information as possible.
Helicopters, divers, search dogs, everyone was mobilized to carry out the search. But once again, there was still no trace of Laetitia Perrais. The search expanded, with forensic police combing the house and property of Tony Meillon's cousin. Finally, they made their first discovery. In the trunk of the car, they found dried blood. They feared the worst, and it would be a long time before the results were known. So the gendarme decided to increase the pressure on Tony Meillon, who was still being questioned. He finally broke down and gave his initial versions of what transpired that fateful night. On Tuesday, January 18th, 2011, he reportedly bumped into Laetitia, whom he had known since the summer before. Together, they decided to go for a walk on the beach to smoke a few joints, with plans to meet up later and have a few drinks. Before picking up Laetitia at the hotel, Meillon went to a store to buy her some gloves as a present. At 10 p.m., they went to a nearby bar, Barbe Blues, and a few minutes later to a second bar. According to Meillon, on the way to the second bar, they had consensual sex on the hood of the car. At around 1 a.m., they separated, each heading off in the opposite direction. But on the road home, Meillon noticed that Laetitia had forgotten the gloves he had given her, so he decided to go back and search for her. It was at this point that he unintentionally hit her with his car and felt the car go up.
He was smoking in the car, and the smoke would have prevented him from having good visibility. And because he wasn't paying attention to the road, he believes this is what caused the tragedy. With a stolen car and illegal substances in his possession, he panicked.
Not knowing what to do, he placed the unconscious Laetitia in the trunk of his car and drove her back to his cousin's property. Upon arriving at the property, he noticed that young Laetitia had passed. He then decided to dispose of the body by throwing it off the Saint-Nazaire Bridge into the Loire River. The investigators don't believe his story at all, except perhaps, unfortunately, Laetitia's death. Initial findings on the property and Mayon's story extinguish any last hope of finding Laetitia alive. In the middle of the yard, an area littered with ashes suggests that Mayon regularly built fires for barbecues, since part of a supermarket cart was used as a grill to cook food. But at this location, the investigators made an incredible discovery. They found shears, a knife blade, pliers, and a hacksaw. They also found what looked like pieces of jeans and bra clips, the chin strap of a helmet, and an earring belonging to Laetitia. All of it completely charred. In the car, a 106, the back seat was missing, and there was a significant amount of dried blood. Samples were taken and sent to the laboratory as quickly as possible. In the caravan, thanks to a UV light, the gendarmes can see small traces of blood on a piece of furniture. According to the experts, these are splashes, not drops. There is plenty of evidence to suggest that Tony Mayon was far from telling the truth in his first version of events. While waiting for the lab results to gather as much forensic evidence as possible, investigators take a second suspect into custody. It was Nicolas Bouvet, a former cellmate of Mayon's. They both met up on January 19th, the day Laetitia disappeared. A few weeks before, they had both robbed a solar panel company in order to recover the copper. They had agreed that Mayon would sell the copper and give Bouvet his share when he had sold everything. Mayon then arranged to meet Bouvet in the Atlantis shopping center parking lot. The unsuspecting Bouvet thought he was going to get his hands on the copper money, but that's not what the meeting was about. Mayon was totally panicked, and Bouvet described him as rushed and paranoid, a behavior he didn't understand at all. Mayon's words were incoherent, and Nicolas Bouvet had no idea what was going on. The suspect told his friend that he ran over a man last night and had to cut him up. The remains of the body, according to Mayon at the time, were placed in 2 large black garbage bags in the trunk of his car. Bouvet explained to the investigators that he thought Mayon was taunting him, that he was joking, or that he was trying to intimidate him to avoid paying his part of the copper he was owed. Faced with Mayon's strange behavior, Bouvet decided to look in the Peugeot's trunk anyway, and indeed noticed the garbage bags. He suddenly felt uneasy about the situation, especially as Mayon's reaction became increasingly suspicious. Mayon went even further, asking his friend for advice on how to hide the pieces of a cut-up body.
Bouvet tells him he should get rid of the remains in the Loire, a river near Nantes. After that, Mayon asks his friend for one last favor. He wants him to dispose of a telephone battery handed to him by the suspect. Bouvet grabs it and throws it away in a corner of the parking lot, as the investigators were able to see on the shopping center's surveillance cameras.
This new testimony confirms that Mayon cut up Laetitia Perrais before disposing of her in the Loire. This would also explain the blood spatters discovered in the caravan. The police officers wasted no time in mobilizing their resources to find Laetitia's remains. They focused on the area around the Saint-Nazaire Bridge, since Tony Mayon claimed to have thrown the rest of the body from the top of the bridge. In Mayon's own words, he says,
"I threw her over a bridge. It was the devil who told me to do that, to make all traces disappear."
But the police had been misled. Tony Mayon couldn't have dumped the remains of the body at the top of the bridge. It's a very busy bridge all year round, day and night, and there's nowhere on the bridge to park his vehicle. He couldn't have stopped in the middle of the bridge without being reported to the police by other drivers.
The police then decided to take a look at the surveillance footage, something they should have done long before, and they discovered that Tony Mayon had never even been on the bridge. Two problems start to arise in this investigation. The first is that the investigation is not making much headway, and the press is getting impatient. The media started taking a very close interest in this case. On radio and TV, everyone's talking about it, and the public wants answers. But for the time being, only speculations are emerging in this investigation, since no body has yet been found. The second, and much more serious problem, was that Tony Mayon's detention was almost at an end, and they wouldn't be able to keep him if the investigators didn't find something to incriminate him soon. On top of this, Tony Mayon has been having a lot of fun during interrogations, and he didn't hesitate to send investigators on false leads. He was asked around 100 questions. The interrogations were intense. The gendarmes were insistent, and he quickly understood that they had little evidence against him, but nothing substantial enough to convict him. Tony Mayon would then stall to gain as much time as possible. Don't forget that the suspect has a lot of experience in police custody in the past. He was familiar with interrogation tactics, and he knew very well that without the body, the police wouldn't be able to take any action against him. Despite the absence of a body, the judge nevertheless decided to charge Tony Mayon with kidnapping and false imprisonment, and to remand him in custody. During his transfer, surrounded by a large number of gendarmes, the man began to talk, explaining that they would never find Laetitia, nor would they find the place where he was hiding her. The search went on every day, and it's now the end of January, and still no body has been found. The case then took a new turn as journalists were finally allowed to visit the cousins' property. But if the authorities had given them permission, it was because they had another lead. Police divers were preparing to search 3 ponds near Lavaux-sur-Loire, 50 kilometers from where Tony Mayon lived. One of them is called the Trou Bleu. It's an old quarry. The water there is very opaque and cold, around 4 degrees Celsius, 39 degrees Fahrenheit. It's extremely difficult to see anything in the depths of this pond, but one of the gendarmes came across a wire cage. He then marked the spot with a buoy so he could return better equipped. On the second excursion, he was able to examine the contents of the cage more closely, and he saw fingers sticking out as well as hair. On February 1st at 11:30 a.m., the first remains of Laetitia were discovered. These were her arms, lower legs, and head, placed in a cage attached to a cinder block at a depth of 7 meters. The bust, however, was not found in the Trou Bleu. It was found much later, on April 9th, 2011, floating in another pond. The bust was attached to a 57-pound cinder block, but decomposition of the body caused it to rise to the surface. It was found by a woman out for a walk. The discovery of Laetitia's body was reported in all the national newspapers on the same day. And it was at this moment when the political aspect came into play. Nicolas Sarkozy, president of the French Republic at the time, pointed the finger at the magistrates and blamed them for Tony Mayon's lack of probation. The magistrates defended themselves, explaining that choices had to be made for the probation of prisoners due to staff shortages.
At the time, Tony Mayon was not considered a priority, which is debatable in view of his criminal record. He had some obligations to follow during his probationary period. He had to find a job, be under the care of a doctor, and prove that he had fulfilled these conditions. If he didn't, he had to return to prison. But none of this was respected, and he should have ended up behind bars.
Nicolas Sarkozy was using Laetitia's case to fight against the penal reform he wanted to implement. Magistrates no longer felt supported by the government in this affair and seemed very angry. They decided to go on strike, bringing the French justice system to a standstill. Out of 195 courts, 170 took part in the strike. But this was no time to make a political statement. This case should have focused on Laetitia's situation and what led to her untimely end. The investigators tried to understand what really happened through an autopsy and attempted to retrace the events leading up to the crime. The doctor announced that Laetitia Perrais had died of asphyxiation as a result of strangulation. According to the doctor, the young woman had been tortured, as he noted 44 stab wounds before she was dismembered. Gestures of extreme violence. Mayon's DNA was found in the girl's mouth, proving a sexual act. Unfortunately, with this little information, it was impossible to prove consent to the sexual act. So the gendarmes returned to Mayon to present him with the latest evidence, linking him to the murder of young Laetitia. But Mayon decided to return to his original strategy, that of total silence. He didn't confess, so the forensic evidence would have to speak for him when he was tried in court. But would this be enough to convict him of his crimes? And would we ever know what truly happened to Laetitia? Only time would tell.
Thank you for watching our video.
We are excited to share these stories with you and to give a voice to the victims worldwide.
If you enjoyed this story,
You can help us out by liking the video, subscribing to our channel, and punching the notification bell.
very important. Don't forget to give us your opinions in the comments.
Thanks again, and we'll see you next time. Au
Au
revoir!
revoir!